G'day guys, Chris Story here. Today, due to popular demand, I'm going to do a review of my 2020 AFL Draft power rankings, and I'm going to have another attempt at redoing it midway through the 2021 season. And there's a few surprises in here. There's also a few of the mid-season draft picks from this year that I've also included, given they were actually eligible in last year's draft. Not that we've seen them yet, but there's a few that I'm going to speculate deserve to be in that mix. So let's have a look. So, here are my rankings. So, firstly, we have in the left-hand column, these are my updated power rankings, so attempting them as of today. So, I gave myself a short 20 minutes, perhaps with a little more time, maybe there'd be a few tweaks, but I'm pretty happy with this list. So, it's just a top 25. I think it'll be pretty competitive. Next up, so I've got my power rankings from 2020. So, this was heading into the draft, how I rated the talent in last year's draft. And then, of course, I've got the actual AFL draft order, just as a point of comparison to show where some of these guys went on draft day, and of course, where I sort of rate them. And one additional feature I've got as well, so I've listed these players in sort of tiers, I suppose you could say, where I've got these lines here to sort of suggest this is the top tier, second tier, third tier, fourth tier, and so on. And I did the same with last year's draft. And I've also speculated based on my feel with last year's draft as well, roughly how clubs would have had the tiers set out too. So that might be a point of general interest. But so to go into my list. So Logan McDonald, I've got number one. So obviously started the year, played some games for Sydney, showed promise for mine. But of course, with Buddy back, he hasn't necessarily been consistently getting AFL games and now is obviously playing in the twos. But in terms of his long-term future, and I made a video in the pre-season predicting he'd be the best player from this draft, and I'm still leaning that way. But there is, of course, some pressure from the next few. So Riley Thilthorpe, he's been fantastic, obviously, for Adelaide. So on debut, he had that big game against Hawthorn where he kicked, I believe it was 5 goals. But he did have Jack Scrimshaw as an opponent. So not necessarily a key defender, not the sort of opponent you'd expect him to be playing against. But again, given he was really so strong last year at Sandford League level, and really the last 2 years, it's no surprise. And it's the same with McDonald. In Waffle at league level, leading the goal kicking for much of the year, no surprise that these guys are delivering right away. But I do see slightly more upside over the long run in McDonald. Obviously, Thilthorpe has all the attributes under the sun, incredible physical profile and all that, but with McDonald, a bit of a later bloomer physically, and showing that higher rate of development, in particular last year, I do see a bit more scope, just because he will have that additional physical development, and really, he has that sort of small man game already, and given he'll bulk up, he'll get stronger, become an even more commanding mark, I think he'll be a real problem for a lot of teams, has that endurance base. So here's my pick at this stage. Pick 3, we haven't seen him yet. I'm being speculative, but I firmly believe in his talent. So I've got Jamara at number 3. So he could jump all the way to number 2, if not number 1, if things go right. But we're yet to see him at AFL level. And of course, it has been hard with the Bulldogs, where, of course, the top team really at the moment in the competition, I'd say it's probably pretty reasonable, assuming fully healthy, although maybe you've got Geelong and a few others on their tail as well, once they're fully healthy too. But obviously you've got Norton, who's been fantastic in sort of nearing that All-Australian form. You might be able to suggest he's in there. And of course, Josh Bruce having a season that I certainly didn't predict coming into the season. So really a renaissance year for him. So with those two playing so well, you've got Tim English, who really is that relieving ruck, is going quite well and is providing a presence up forwards. There just hasn't been that room for Jamara. So the key with Jamara is just a case of he just needs to stay motivated, keep improving, and his time will come. So, but when his time comes, there's no one more dynamic aerially inside 50. So, I think he could be a real threat. But look, his kicking in particular isn't that strong. He still does need to add a few more things to his game, improve his work rate, improve his endurance. But look, his VFL form's been pretty strong and he's pressing for games. So he's already playing to an AFL standard for mine. And to a nearing McDonald and Thilthorpe level, though probably not quite there. And that's understandable given there was no Victorian junior footy last year. So that's why I've got him third for now. But again, right in that conversation for me. And then number 4, and this is a big mover for me. So Nick Cox last year, where did I rate him? So if I was to take out Haitley, I had him at 20th, but barely. So, and for me, he was a bit of a speculative guy where, look, the last time we'd sort of seen him was obviously a year out from the draft. And at that stage, he wasn't necessarily of a level where he certainly wasn't in the category with the likes of a Thilthorpe and Ugle-Hagan, or certainly not where McDonald was by the end of last year. So it was speculative, but to his credit, he's really developed and he looks like he can really be a very good player. So as that tall wing, exceptional skills, has the endurance, his marking hopefully keeps improving, and hopefully he can become even more of a threat forward of centre. But in terms of skills, dual-sided, he's gone really well. And his first few games, look, he was a bit quiet, but then he really came into his own. So Nick Cox has really been, for me, probably the biggest surprise in last year's draft for me, and you can really see it based on my rankings. So credit to him for being on this level, and I'm very excited for the long run. And if I was to start a team from basic, Nick Cox would probably be one of the players I'd be starting on a wings. So just being able to have that full duration of career, he's got that endurance, has the skills. So he's hard to pass up at that height, where just having that tall height, we've sort of seen it with Richo on the wing, Nick Riewoldt on the wing when late in the careers they've done that. Of course, Cox needs to develop that forward craft and that contested marking to that level, and he's not nearly there. But if he can develop that, wow, maybe he can push to the 1 or 2 spot on this board. So very exciting player, has to be in that top category. There's no debate to that at all. So the next group down. So there has been a bit of movement. So Will Phillips, he was number 3 on my board. I thought he was by far and away the top midfielder. And then, of course, he went pick 3 to North Melbourne in the draft. So it's been a disappointing start to the season, but I do think he'll have a really good career. But I'll add a bit more on him later. But on to this next group. So we've got Elijah Hollands. So he's still recovering from injury. So at this stage, it's speculative having him this high. But look, given the disappointment of really a lot of the midfielders and really how far behind sort of where I guess the general hope and optimism was for a lot of these guys, they just haven't sort of been on that level. So given that, I think it's pretty reasonable to have someone of Holland's talent at the number 5 spot. So I'm pretty comfortable, honestly, having him there. And I didn't really have to move him down a great deal. It was really just with the ascendance of Cox and probably Thilthorpe being a little better than expected, McDonald being better than expected. It's really sort of meant he's really been sort of, I guess, forced to remain the top of this group, but he's obviously moved down a spot. And then from there, so you've got Lachlan Jones. So he's shown signs for Port Adelaide at AFL level, and I think he's going to keep improving. So as I said in the preseason, he's AFL ready. I had him at 6. I've still got him at 6. I think the recruiters in Clubland really made a mistake not bidding on him earlier. So pick 16, well, I think that's a bit too late. So he's got the defense craft, obviously, strong body, good kick, very competitive, has that hard edge, but he's also got the scope in the future to develop as a midfielder, and he's got that burst of speed as well. So really exciting player for me, underrated, should have gone higher and still rate him highly. So next up, so I've got Heath Chapman. So I'm liking the signs of development and everything I've been hearing. So whether he's playing as a sort of tall halfback, tall wing, there's talk maybe in the future he's going through the midfield. So all that sort of talk is really increasing my level of optimism with him. So with others not necessarily performing to standard, Chapman as expected coming in, showing he can play at AFL level, I've got a high level of optimism for his career ahead. So I think he'll have a great deal of success. So obviously he went pick 14, I had him at 12. I'm bumping him up to 7. I think he really needs to move up quite a bit at this point. But of course, that's opinion. Some might have him more in this range or about where he was drafted, but fair enough. But for me, being that tall 190 plus and already being sort of an AFL standard for mine, well, that's really exciting. And I think he really needs that credit, certainly in the top 10 for me. And I like him in this bracket personally, in terms of talent. And then next up, we've got Braden Campbell. So I had him quite a bit lower at 11, but I have bumped him up to 8. And the reason for that is simple. So, as I was saying all throughout the preseason, for those who were watching my videos then, well, I was saying with Campbell, you put him in defence and that's going to unlock his game. And the fact that Sydney have made that positional move, it really gives me a great deal of confidence that he can sort of reach the heights that he should. And look, obviously in defence for Sydney, they've got a lot of really good ball users. You've got Jake Lloyd, obviously, who monopolises a lot of the ball there. But then you've obviously got Dawson as well, so another really good kick. So it is hard for him to get as much ball as he could, potentially, as that rebounder. But I do think that, I guess, that usage rate will grow over time. So do watch for that. But yeah, for me, he's in this conversation. I don't think he's ever necessarily, if he was to play up the field, ever going to be that sort of elite ball winner or accumulator. But perhaps he can be that, maybe say, Daniel Rich equivalent across halfback, as that real premier ball user with that penetrating kick. But then he also has a good burst of speed to him too. So, and he's pretty strong-bodied as well for his age, really. So the next group, so Will Phillips. So he's the one that I don't want to say I'm disappointed by, but really I am. I was really hoping immediate impact. He should have been a round 1 best 22 player, really performing to a high level, but he hasn't really quite been there. But I'm not sure it's necessarily all his fault. So obviously a year out from being drafted, well, Phillips was really ripping it up. He was getting Matt Arrow's sort of numbers. So he was playing phenomenal footy. But then, of course, in his draft year, well, he did have that first half of the year where he was really sitting out hurt. So he didn't really get to necessarily put the training time in or really be able to improve his game necessarily as he would had he been healthy. So with that understood, he may have also had some preseason limitations. I'm sure those who follow sort of all the preseason stuff might have a bit more on that too. But look, you do have those factors. And the other component as well with Phillips is he is quite an early bloomer. So given that, I can't quite give him the credit of being this top group, but I do think that is a lot better than the way he's performed. And I do still have quite a high level of confidence that not only will he make it, but I think he will be a very good mid. I'm not necessarily seeing elite mid, and that's why I can't credit him in one of these top 2 categories, but I do think he'll be a good piece, and I do think he'll improve quite a lot. So given the preseason, I think next year he'll really be shining, but this year, look, he doesn't look quite where he needs to be. So yeah, give him that year, and yeah, keep your faith in Phillips. I think he'll come good. At number 10, this will shock people. I'll be the only person in the country to do this, but I'm more than happy to. So Jackson Callow. So for those who've watched his Sandful play, and I've watched, I think it's 4 or 5 of his Sandful League games this year, well, he's been phenomenal. So just absolutely dominant as that contested marking force, one-on-one force, just vice-like grip, but plays such a great team game as well. So I really like his game. Great kick as well in terms of ball use, hitting targets inside 50. Just all those intangibles that you want. He crashes packs, brings it to ground. Just really like his game. And his game also translates really perfectly to key defense. So Hawthorn have a great deal of options here. And I wasn't kidding when I said that Hawthorn got the bargain of the mid-season draft in picking him. I think it was pick 17 in the mid-season draft, so with their second round picks. So yeah, I do have a high level of faith. Last year, I had Callow at 20 in my power rankings. And of course, the last time that there was a key position player inside my top 20 that went undrafted, well, that was Jordan Butts, and now is a best 22 player for Adelaide. And the last time that I rated a Tasmanian key position player that went undrafted was Ben Brown. And in 2010, 2011, I rated him a top 40 talent both of those years. If not for the injury, I would have said first round. But of course, he went in 2013 out of the VFL once he transferred over to Victoria. So I do always rate myself in terms of my key position player identification. So we'll have to see whether Callow lives up to these heights. And it is quite a big call to say the least, but there is some Brian Lake, Jeremy McGovern-esque sort of feel to him. So he's not an athlete. He's not super quick, super agile. You don't have any of that, but just the way he uses his body, the presence, the marking strength, it's all there. So he's got the sort of ingredients where I feel he can translate over. And being that dominant player in the Sandful, he was leading the comp in contested marks. So doing that as an 18-year-old at that stage, well, that's phenomenal.
And seeing him as a point of comparison to Jason Horn, who's a mid forward, he's a top probably 2 pick realistically in this year's draft. Well, Horn got 6 disposals, or I think it was around 6, maybe 7. And look, his forward pressure was good, but did nothing else. And I went sort of watching the game online thinking, oh, I'm going to take a bunch of notes on Horn. He's going to dominate. He's going to play really good footy. But I ended up, for the majority of the notes, I think it was about, I don't know, it might have been 90% of the notes were on Callow rather than Horn, because and this wasn't even one of Callow's really good games. It was it was a fairly mediocre game. I think he only got a goal, maybe a couple of contested marks in that game, but still he was on that level where he was clearly the dominant player and the one that really had a presence and impacted games. So Callow's very advanced for his age, so I do have quite a lot of optimism. And with the bigger bodied key positioners as well, they might not necessarily have as much scope to develop in the long run, but Callow doesn't need to develop all that much. It's very minor refinements in his game, and he can be a real good piece. So yeah, I'm really excited by his scope for the long run, and that's why I've got him as high as I do, just to justify that surprising selection. So number 11, so I've gone Denver Grainger-Barras, and look, I think it's probably around the fair spot. I could have him higher, could possibly have him in this range. I'm not even sure if he's played VFL this year. In the Box Hill games that I've seen I think a couple of them now, but he's been absent, so I think he has been hurt. But nonetheless, I'm just not as confident in him physically. So although he's skinny, he was quite good from a young age. So very competitive, can intercept. So I do think he'll be a good piece. Maybe arguably I could have him even nearing this bracket. Maybe if I had another in this area, maybe I could have him 9th. But look, I'll have him down for now until I sort of see him this year at least. And I can sort of reevaluate to see where he's actually at with his footy. But I do have a higher level of confidence in Callow. I do think he has a greater upside, and I'd say the same with Phillips. So for that reason, in sort of quickly going through this list, I've got Grainger-Barras where I do. But Hawthorn fans who argue he should be higher, look, fair enough, I hear you. He should be in that conversation. But again, until we see him, there's not that evidence. So Zach Reid, I think he's played, I've seen at least one of his games for Essendon, so I'd say he's played at least one there. I haven't noted him in their VFL team, so I'm not even sure how many VFL games he's played, honestly. But yeah, look, my level of optimism towards his development is increasing. So if you look through my list here, I didn't rate him inside my top 25, but I had him probably around 26th, 27th, thereabouts, from my own power rankings. And if you want, you can go through my own at a later time. It's all up on YouTube, on ESPN, on Big Footy, for those that are interested. But yeah, look, with Reid, my level of optimism is growing. It's a similar story with Cox, where again, in his draft year, didn't get to play. I really wanted to be a bit cautious with the key position players, because without games, I just wasn't sure how they would develop. And we're sort of seeing with Jamara, he's probably not as advanced as I would have hoped. And it's the same with a lot of the Victorians as it's worked out. But with Reid at least being able to show, look, he can participate at AFL level and not look completely overawed, well, look, that's a good sign for me, given we didn't see him last year. And obviously he's got fantastic skills, moves really well for someone his height. He can play key back, he can play ruck, so I do think there is a good amount of scope there. So I do want to give him credit, and I do want to move him up in my projections. And the other component to that as well is, well, the mids and I guess the non-talls, I suppose, to put it that way, they haven't been as impressive as I've hoped coming into the year. So with that also understood and a component of the equation, it has allowed me to move Zach Reid up with a bit more confidence than I may have previously. So at 13, so I've got another mid-season draft pick, and of course the first pick in the mid-season draft for North Melbourne, and that was Jacob Edwards. So last year, AFL clubs didn't know who he was. I certainly hadn't heard his name, let alone seen him. But this year, of course, has come onto the radar as a really rapid developer. So for the long run, he's a piece. We might not see him this year, and that's okay. But yeah, certainly as a key forward, ruck sort of combo, athletic, strong mark, but just the rate of improvement. That's what I want to see with the really tall guys. So that tells me that 2, 3, 4 years from now, he's going to be fantastic. So high level of optimism, but of course we'll have to wait and see how he goes, because we haven't even seen him at VFL level yet. So we'll even have to just wait for that. But at this stage, I'm speculating he should be inside the top 15. Just given, again, the lack of impressive midfielders, really, I'd say. One player who's really risen up my board, and I'm not surprised to see him impact games immediately. I did predict coming into the year that we would see him year one, and he did have the scope to be a regular player, but I did not expect the immediacy of impact, and certainly not on the level he did, so credit to him. So Errol Goulden, so fantastic, deserves to be top 15. Of this next group, I think he deserves to be top, honestly. And people who have him higher, maybe even have him in this conversation, fair enough. But for me, look, I'm just looking at him as, look, he's a shorter player, not sure of his upside. Well, how's his contested ball going to be? Can that grow? Look, I'm just not sure. But he's a very good player, doesn't even need to improve a lot. He's clear AFL standard, and in terms of immediacy of performance, you could have him really up there with anyone. So, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable having him there for now. Number 15, Archie Perkins. He's gone pretty well for Essendon. I had him 15, so I haven't really had to move him. But look, yeah, he can play mid-forward. I wouldn't mind seeing him in the future shift back into defence. I think that might be a potential good option there for the future. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But he's got some capabilities. He's good ball user, has some acceleration. Can win it a little bit, but we'll have to see whether he can win it a bit more at AFL level. But yeah, there's some signs of growth, and I think he's an AFL piece at least. So that's why I'm pretty comfortable having him there. The next couple, a lot of people would argue, have him higher. But it's just I wanted to give credit to a lot of the talls who I think in the future will turn out better. And then there's a few in other positions where I think maybe they have a bit more long-term scope to develop. But Sam Berry has shown immediate year one player, really has a hunger for the contest, can win his own ball, strong tackler, does have a burst of acceleration, and I like him. He's an AFL piece for me. So, and he's advanced for his age. Whether he has the same upside for growth as a lot of these guys that I have higher, that's where I'm querying there. But yeah, I like him as a piece. So, and I moved him up a couple of spots from where I had him last year. And of course, Adelaide, it's in the late 20s they picked him. So, yeah, I do feel my rating was probably a bit closer there. Tom Powell, so again, moved him up a couple of spots, a bit like with Berry, but of course he did go a bit earlier. And again, a lot of people would argue, you should have Powell earlier. He's been fantastic early, and for those that say that, I don't disagree. He's been, again, a bit like a Goulden, one of the very top performers to really start us off this year. So, but in terms of upside, look, we'll have to wait and see whether he can really be sort of up there as a mid. I could argue maybe he's ahead of Perkins, maybe Berry. He's in this conversation for me, but for me, that's sort of the range I'd have him, where I'm not necessarily seeing him becoming that elite contested ball winner. But if he can, fantastic. And I'd like to see probably a few more things from him. But he's playing very good footy. He's clearly AFL ready, clearly AFL standard. Whether it's midfield, whether it's cross half forward, wherever you put him, look, he is AFL standard. But it's just, does he have the same upside as the others? Not sure, but I'm very comfortable having him at 17. Is a really solid, low risk, sort of high floor sort of pick there. But whether he has the ceiling of a few others, that's the slight query there. So moving down a bit, so Tanner Bruhn, it's been hard for him to get games, obviously, for GWS, and they have needed to use him forward as well, which is the other issue there. So his best play is as a midfielder, but he is that goal-kicking midfielder. So when he has received a few games for GWS, well, it's been as a forward. So we'll have to wait and see, sort of, can he break into their best side? Don't know. I'd have to check how many games he's played with them and what his current status is, but I know he played early season at least. But yeah, VFL play, only reasonable. So I have had to shift him down. It's just GWS aren't the right team for him. Had he gone to a team where there were more midfield opportunities, I think he'd probably be doing a little better than he is. And on talent, look, I could argue he's actually a little better than these guys here in this range, but again, it's just the destination of team, just suboptimal there. Finlay Macrae, having watched his VFL games, he's actually been terrific in the VFL, dominant at that level. I've been surprised he hasn't translated better to AFL play yet, honestly. That's sort of my feedback there. But he is someone I really want to see Collingwood pump more games into, because I do still have a high level of optimism around sort of his scope to develop. But unfortunately, he will take a bit longer than I'd expected at least. So, yeah, we'll have to see how that goes. But again, another case of a Victorian where had the season gone ahead last year, he'd be a lot more advanced than he is. And the next player on this list is the exact same story, Reef McGuinness, where very tall midfielder slash utility, where he'd be about a 193. Very athletic, but in the games, the VFL games I've seen at least, well, he's been pretty quiet. I don't know, he might have had some injury issues. I haven't really been following all that closely, but yeah, in the one VFL game for Collingwood I have seen him in, he was pretty quiet. So, yeah, we'll have to see how he develops, but he's one more where I was saying all along, really, first year, don't even expect to see him, but expect in a few years that's where he'll show his development and be good. So, obviously with McRae and with McGuinness, it has been a big drop, but I was expecting them both to be more advanced than they are. So that's why. But on talent, look, I could comfortably move them up, but I just want to really wait and see until they do perform at AFL level. So Caleb Poulter. So for me, he's been a bit of a surprise packet, actually. My criticism coming into the draft and why I didn't have him inside my top 25, and I did rate him for a lot of the year, but what I really realised when I looked at him more closely as the year progressed was that he's not really a first possession winner at stoppages, and he really doesn't necessarily like to go in as hard as he should. So that is my critique there, but of course, good height, has the speed and skills, can rack it up. So, and Collingwood have put him in the right spot. So putting him on a wing, that's the right spot for him. Does he have the upside of some of these others? I'm not sure, given he doesn't really quite have that physical edge, but it would be very easy, given the way he's going the last few weeks, to have him a lot higher. So, but yeah, for me, for now, this is where he should be, but higher certainly than I had him, higher than he actually went in the draft. So, and I should also have here Ned Moyles, so 2021 mid-season draft. So, of course, he was picked by Gold Coast in the mid-season draft, and he's been really terrific so far this year. So for Oakley, of course, as I've mentioned in previous videos, in their best in every game there. In the AFL Academy game against Geelong, he was one of the really competitive players, and a lot more competitive than the rest of the really sort of beaten team, you could say, that just sort of gave up a bit. But Moyle was always there, always competitive, credit to him. And then, of course, in a 3-game stint for Collingwood's VFL side, played really good competitive footy. So there's a great deal of scope to develop there. And in the long run, he could probably be a Jared Witt's successor for Gold Coast. So good pick by Gold Coast in the mid-season draft. And I think there's a lot of scope to develop. So, of course, speculative call, but I think it might pay off in the very long run. So wait till he's sort of in his mid-20s, and I think we might see something. And look, he's actually fairly advanced for his age, so it might not take too long to see him. Probably not this year, but give him a couple of years, then we might be seeing him. So Joel Jeffrey, so another Gold Coast. He was a pre-listed player, so they didn't need to use a pick for him. They didn't need to use any number of their picks. But yeah, with a Jeffrey, I do believe in his scope to develop in the long run, whether it's as a forward, as a defender, just that athletic marking type. There's just a lot of signs in the long run for me that he can come good. But of course, having not seen him, he has dropped down a touch. But look, I still like him in the long run. I think there's a good chance to develop. So we'll have to see how that goes. Isaiah Winder, look, I've got him, I think they pronounce it Winder, but he's someone where I liked him last year, and it's a lot higher than where clubs had him, but I still like him. So, to my knowledge, he's only played the one Waffle game to date, but he kicked 5 goals in that game, so phenomenal. And you can really play him anywhere, whether it's mid, forward, back. There's really, he's a really good player. He's got the speed, uses it well, can win his own ball, wins it contested. So he's a guy where he has the attributes, and I think he comes good in the long run. So I think teams really missed on not taking him early, and I'm going to stand by my initial evaluation and say, look, I think he comes good. So we'll have to wait and see there. And at number 25, so for those who have stuck around, particularly those fantasy and Supercoach people, well, you're being rewarded right here and now. So Jai Newcomb. I think he's playing this week for Hawthorn, and I think he's going to be a really good player for Hawthorn. And I think he's going to have an impact right away, honestly. Where looking at his VFL play, he started off the season really well, and he's just kept getting better and better to the extent that the last few weeks for Box Hill in the VFL has been their best player and certainly their best midfielder. So, yeah, he's ready. So, last year, of course, he was eligible, but he wasn't picked because for Gippsland, well, Gippsland didn't get to play. So he hasn't really played any sort of recognised junior footy at all. So heading into Box Hill, he was someone where he was considered draftable in last year's draft, but just no one had really seen enough of him to justify picking him. But of course, this year going so well, having that power, that contested side to his game, that competitiveness, strong tackling, I think is going to come in for Hawthorn and be a piece. And I think he might actually be someone who allows a Hawthorn to maybe even trade a Tom Mitchell at the end of the year to, let's say, a Richmond, who might want to get someone sort of immediate to help their immediate sort of premiership chances and allow Hawthorn to get a few more picks. Not that he's by any means a Tom Mitchell caliber piece, but he does replace, at least to some extent, some of that sort of contested work, stoppage work. So, yeah, I do think Hawthorn did really well with that pick, even though I did have a few others ahead of him, but I do think he will be a piece and he'll really help Hawthorn out through that midfield. So keep him on your radar, and if you haven't picked him for your fantasy teams already for this week, lock him in now. And for Supercoach, if you want, you could get on this week, but if not, feel free to wait a couple of weeks. So, and to go through my end of 2020 power rankings, so the way I was seeing it, so it was a 1A, 1B scenario. Heading into the preseason, I moved McDonald up, just really loving what he was doing through the preseason. So that sort of changed from there. Phillips, I thought he'd be the dominant midfielder, but hasn't quite turned out that way. I think he'll still be very good. Had these three here, not a lot of change. Had this group here. Haitley's been really disappointing. I really hoped for more. His signs with GWS, both at AFL level and in the NEAFL, were terrific. So, but to his credit, he has picked up things the last sort of few weeks in the SANFL, but I was expecting a lot more immediacy of impact there. So, others who have dropped out of my list, so you've got Jack Carroll, Braden Cook. Neither of them have been as impressive as I've hoped. So they were two that I rated quite a bit higher than AFL clubs did. So Cook went in the 20s. Carroll, I think, went about 41 to Carlton, thereabouts. So, look, I do still have optimism for them, but I'd have them probably late 20s, early 30s now, just with their slower than expected starts. But Carroll showed a lot of development last year. He does have a late year birthday, really developed that contested side of his game. Carlton are looking for him to improve more sort of defensively and that sort of thing, but I think he's still got the chance to come good. And with a Braden Cook, he's someone where last year he really developed like crazy too. So just having that high rate of development, I do still see an upside there, but yeah, unfortunately, he hasn't come on as quick as hoped. Other players that aren't on this list anymore. So Luke Pedlar, so he's someone where he'd only played about four, maybe 5 games last year in the SA under 18s. So he was a speculative pick to go as high as pick 11 in the end. But there were the glimpses there where he does have the scope to develop. And he's someone where, look, his SANFL play, again, a bit like with a Cook, hasn't been as good necessarily as I'd hoped to this point. But nonetheless, he still does have the attributes to be developable. So give him another year, maybe another couple of years, and we might sort of see some of his better play. So he could come into consideration for this list then. Blake Coleman, so younger brother of Kadeen. We'll have to see how he develops, but he's definitely got that chance. So he's got talent, so we'll have to wait and see. He's still top 40. All these guys, for me, are still top 40, those that aren't in this 25. And then with her Brandon Walker. So playing in the waffle, doing all right, but he's not yet sort of ready to earn games. But has the attributes, has the acceleration, really good kick. So he could be a piece out of defence in his own right, but just not this year, I don't think. General comments from the actual AFL draft order. So the only pick in this top group that hasn't sort of been performing to expectation would be Will Phillips. So, and I've already mentioned that before. Others, obviously Grainger-Barras we haven't seen yet. Holland's still hurt. Cox has done a lot better than expected. So great pick by Essendon. So very well done there. Pedlar hasn't, as I've mentioned just before, not living up to expectation yet. Connor Stone, confusing pick then, has debuted at AFL level, but not ready. For me, it's just a bit too early, really, to have him there. If he went pick 30 onwards, I could say maybe justifiable, but just a bit too speculative for me and still remains in that basket. Oliver Henry, there was talk around the draft, maybe he goes somewhere around the pick 10-ish range, thereabouts. So he was considered at the time a slider for Collingwood. A lot of people might still have him around where he went. He did debut early for Collingwood, of course, but has been in the VFL since. So there's scope to develop. I possibly underrated him in my list, but for me, he's still not a top 25 at this point until he proves otherwise. Ryan Angwin, for me, was a bit too raw at the time of the draft. He's a long way off. He's still too skinny. Don't expect to see him for a while. McRae, of course, is probably actually around where he should have been, and I might have overrated him a bit. But I just really liked his game from 2019 from what I saw. He has mountains of scope to develop there. So, and more advanced than his brother at the same age. So, it's just a shame he isn't more advanced at this point. Max Holmes, he's been a pleasant surprise, and it's been a surprise actually even seeing him appear at AFL level. So Geelong just wanted to give him that taste, but of course he will take a bit more time to develop. So we'll have to sort of see how that goes. Bowie and Lowry, I thought maybe they might get some earlier games for Melbourne, but of course Melbourne have just been having a sensational season, so they haven't necessarily needed to rush youth in. So that's that. But yeah, for me, outside 25, but they've both got potential for a future, maybe at AFL level. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for future updates if you haven't already. And if you've got any questions about any of the draft prospects from the 2020 draft, maybe some that are on your team and you haven't seen, or you want to know a bit about how they're going, hit me up. Also, if you want any details on the 2021 draft, well, of course, I'm all over that. Producing content regularly for ESPN. So every week there's weekly wraps going up, and I produce monthly power rankings for them. So, and I've also reviewed the mid-season draft as well. So if they're of interest, head to espn.com.au. And you can also find on, if you haven't followed my Twitter already, AFL Draft Expert, get behind me on there. And also on Big Footy. So type in Nightmare Draft Almanac 2021, and you can find all my content there, both across ESPN and on YouTube. And on there, it's a forum, of course. So that's an opportunity to ask some additional draft-related questions or see some of the conversations I've had with others around some of this year's draft prospects and just general list management ideas as well. I get questions around quite often as well. But anyway, see you guys in the next video.